Okay, first thing I want to say is that I'd like you to sort of get involved. I encourage you to ask questions as I go along. Make whatever comments you want. Just stick up your hand and I'll point to you and invite you to speak. If we're running long, I'll talk to you later. But yeah, get involved. It's much more fun for me. I'm a lot less nervous if people are involved. It's more of a conversation than just me doing a presentation. Because it gets pretty boring. It might also help to know a bit about my background, I think. So I'm a former client-side web developer. And before that, I was probably what you'd call a full-stack developer then, which just meant that I was working pretty much on my own or on a very small team and I had to do everything. I've worked on a few things you might have heard of. So the Yahoo homepage in around 2010, that sort of time. And I was one of the people who wrote the client-side framework that all the BBC websites run on. So if you've visited a BBC website anytime in the last about 8 years, you've probably seen some of my work. That includes sort of subtle things like click tracking and all that sort of analytics stuff to cookie management, and then more obvious things like the header and footer, which you might notice. This is the sort of thing that just to give me a confidence boost, my sister told me that the 6-year-old she teaches could have done that with PowerPoint. So it took us ages to do. So it's one of those things that it looks simple and it's trying to get it working on millions of web pages is a little harder. On the plus side, a former colleague of mine once asked Tim Peake if anyone on the International Space Station had ever looked at the BBC website, and they have. So that means I've got code that's run in space, or at least as close to as you're going to get, which is pretty cool. But my job these days is I moved into accessibility as a full-time role. So my job really now is sort of helping designers and developers create accessible websites. And I spend a lot more time thinking about user experience than I do about code these days. And my views, which I'm going to share to you a little bit about JavaScript and its purpose almost, is to some extent informed by that transition. So my talk is based on a simple idea, and that is that if you have code, JavaScript in this case, that is running on someone's browser that they've downloaded and is running on their machine, then that code should always have a potential to improve their user experience. And if not, then it probably shouldn't be there. So does anyone disagree with me? Have examples of why I might be wrong? Good, I came prepared. So I thought people might say, well, ads, well, how do they improve the user experience? Well, the fact is that a lot of sites run ads, and if they didn't have ads, there'd be no site because there's no one paying for it. So as terrible as they may be, they're there for a reason. Or tracking. Now this is kind of an interesting one. I think that a lot of companies just, they'll build a website, they'll put Google Analytics on it without really thinking about it, and then they'll never look at it. Well, if you're tracking people and then not using the data to inform, say, the content that you're going to put on the website, if you're a news site, should we write this sort of article rather than this sort of article, or things like that, then the tracking doesn't help anyone. Just knowing that, X thousand people visited a page, if you're not doing anything with the data, not using that data to inform a better user experience, then again, probably shouldn't be there. But I'm glad you all agree with me. Makes it a lot easier. So, is anyone familiar with Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs? Lots of nods, good. So it's a theory of psychological development proposed by Abraham Maslow in, check notes, 1943. And he believed that needs were needed to pass through different phases to meet what humans required. So they go from meeting psychological needs to, which is, just sort of really basic stuff. So psychological safety needs. So to breathe, sort of physiological, I keep saying psychological, physiological. So air to breathe, food to eat, that sort of thing, to a safe place to sleep, that sort of thing, all the way through to self-actualization. So being the best sort of person that you can be, living to your potential. Now, there's a downside to Maslow in that he actually wasn't really interested in accessibility or inclusivity at all. He only included the healthiest people he could find, basically young students at universities in his studies. And he said, the study of crippled, stunted, immature and unhealthy specimens can yield only a cripple psychology and a cripple philosophy. So I think it's fair to say that Maslow was not a nice man, especially if we judge them against the standards that we tend to judge people against today. But the approach that he had, I think, is a useful one. Now, here's an alternative. Aaron Walter, a man who wrote a book called Designing for Emotion, created this hierarchy of user needs. This is where it ties in. And it defines the requirements of an interface to meet, that must be implemented so you can attain various levels of user needs. So we start with functional at the bottom. So if a website is not functional, then you just can't be reliable. If it's not reliable, then it can't be usable. If every time you try and do something on your website or application, it falls over, it's not usable. And usable is obviously a good goal, but you need to be able to be able to have a usable website, even if it's somewhat difficult, to have a pleasurable experience of using a website. And I think sometimes we get as far as maybe usable, don't really think about the pleasurable thing. And this is particularly true of standards and guidelines. Applies to lots of things like, say standards around performance or uptime or security tend to meet the functional and reliable stages of this, usable, maybe not. So the guidelines we have are only getting us halfway up this pyramid. What I do, my day job is sort of based around web content accessibility guidelines, the W3C standards, and they're pretty good at deciding whether something might be functional, even reliable from an accessibility point of view. So we can do things like test if a button on a web page can be operated with a keyboard. We can even check that things have an appropriate accessible name and expose states to screen readers and things like that. And we can check sort of more abstract things. So there's a success criteria called consistent identification, and that's basically that components are that have the same functionality on different pages, different parts of an applications are identified consistently. But WCAG, like most other standards, only really gently touches on what it means to be usable, and pleasurable is such a variable notion on something like the web that it's really impossible to standardize. So it's these two parts, the usable and pleasurable, that are missed out. Now, pleasurable can mean different things depending on what you're trying to do, different situations. We're going to stick to the web and only some of the web, but it's probably easy to imagine pleasure from things we love doing, so the things that you're interested in on the web. But an aspect of this also applies to things we don't like. So maybe banking or filing tax returns or those sort of things. We're not really going to get a sense of joy, but we can get pleasure in the fact that the website helped us to achieve our goal. Didn't just not to prevent us to do things, but actually actively helped us. And I think that's where the pleasurable part of that would come in. The website hasn't hindered us; it's helped us. So I want to give you a few ideas on the sort of things that I think we can do with JavaScript to perhaps make apps and sites maybe a little bit more pleasurable to use. So I'm going to start off with something fairly simple. This is passwords. and entering them into forms on the web. So people in general, perhaps not the people in this room, have problems with passwords. I imagine a lot of people here are using password managers, which takes some of the pain out of it. But the majority of people, let's be honest, aren't doing that. They may be built into browsers, but as soon as you have more than one computer, maybe one at work, one at home, that becomes more difficult, and fewer people are going to be making use of these tools. We know that it's a good idea to have unique passwords for each account, but as managing passwords becomes more difficult for people, that's something that's one of the first things they're going to stop doing. They're not going to try and remember the unique passwords. And it's not helped when, the dozens of times, even with my password manager, where I've gone in, I've typed in a nice long 20+ character string or something like that, and it's told me, well, you don't have an uppercase number in there, so that's not a valid password for us. So as soon as these barriers come into force, people are going to tend to fall back on really sort of simple passwords that they can remember or stick on a post-it note or whatever. But there's a further challenge that I think we can potentially do something about. And that is, even if someone has got one password that they use everywhere, and it might be a nice long phrase or something that would meet the little security barriers to entry that a lot of websites show, it still makes them sort of difficult to type in, because we don't want people to be typing in eight characters. Wasn't there some recent news that's now hackable in about 2.5 hours with some decent hardware? So that's no good. We want these long things. We potentially going to have complicated passwords still because of the requirements of websites. So if there are things we can do to help people type their password in, that's a good thing. I also have this sort of problem, even though I use a password manager. I've got a mate who I just go and visit him, and we just watch TV and hang out. And I have a Netflix account, he doesn't. So if we want to use Netflix at his house, I have to type in the password. I've got a stupid long password, which I have no idea what it is. I never see it except for when I'm typing this in. And fortunately, Netflix has a trick. It means you can click a button and it will switch the password field from being a regular password field to one where I can see the characters in it. So as I'm typing it out, I can give it a check before I hit return and make sure it's correct. And that's basically turned something that would take me maybe 2 or 3 goes to get right into, right, I can get it done in one go. And it's such a simple thing. So basically this is the entire code. I've missed out some const and lets and all that sort of stuff, but this is the gist of it. Like I say, I don't do full-time development anymore, so please don't judge me too harshly on anything I show you. But hopefully I'm on safe ground here. But basically I'm going to get check the input, which is the password field, see what type it is, see if it's already a password, decide whether it's going to be a password or text, and then when I click a button which is next to it, I'll demonstrate this, is going to set the attribute type to either text or password as appropriate. And we're going to do some clever stuff here. This is ARIA pressed. I'm going to include some accessibility somewhere. ARIA pressed is something that will let screen readers know that that button is in an active state. So, live demos. Whose idea was this? Hopefully this is fairly straightforward. So, I can type away here. Really simple. I can click the show password field, and there's my super secure rambling password. And it really is that easy. This is just a fairly simple thing that I think we can do in a lot of cases, and will help some people. It's going to be particularly handy for people who lack maybe fine motor control. So that makes just entering any particular content potentially a difficult task. But anything where you need to be super strict about the characters, you can't correct a typo later with a password. And making sure you've hit the right keys is a lot easier if you can see what you're typing than star. Something you can really only do with JavaScript at the moment. I imagine this is something that's going to get built into browsers. Maybe it already has since I've started thinking about this talk, but I don't think so. You're not going to want to use this on every case. You're not going to want to do this for, I don't know, your employee login for MI5 or something like that potentially. But for for lots of sites, I think this is pretty good idea. The web audio API. I don't know if many people have sort of used these things. Question, hello. For banking apps which have, for example, drop-down fields to pick the characters from your memorable word or whatever it may be, or do they pose a challenge, an accessibility challenge? Yeah, I don't think they pose an accessibility challenge as long as these form fields are labeled properly and given a good name so that they're understandable. Usability-wise, of course, they add a barrier, but it's kind of the point. They make it more difficult. Whether it's actually something that works or not, I don't know. I know people might be related to them, but who would do that sort of thing, and then because that's difficult, they'd write it down in a text file and put it on their desktop. So I think putting these barriers up, this is a slightly different subject, but often makes things less accessible. It leads to people writing things on post-it notes and attaching them to the monitor. Whereas, if you can do it sort of, two-factor authentication over text messages or something like that is going to be a lot more useful. But I do have a bank account with a bank who does exactly that, and it really annoys me. And I don't know if it makes me any safer. But accessibility-wise, I don't think so. Not really. It's going to annoy people, but regardless of whether you have accessibility needs or not. Okay. So this is the demo is sort of slightly stranger. I was going to sort of think about demonstrating sort of web notifications, but then I thought it was a bit obvious, and also I'm doing a presentation where I want to turn off notifications so they don't start popping up. So that made it sort of difficult to do both things. So I decided to do something similar, but with the web audio API. So imagine you have something like Twitter, which is pulling in new content all the time, or you have a thing in the masthead of your website which says you have X messages or whatever. So just to make those things a little bit more noticeable, like you would do with something like perhaps Slack or Skype or something like that, you can have things play a little sound, an earcon, an audio icon, effectively, you can basically, you might want to use these for sort of non-urgent things like the message stuff, and it's really straightforward. Now, again, the demo's odd. I want you to read out what you see on the screen, please, and shout it out. Leonie will appreciate the audio description. I don't know what inspired me to do this or to wear this t-shirt. I can't really tell, but here goes. Hopefully the sound will work. We tested it before, but we haven't tested it since. You know what? I'm an accessibility specialist. I know how to use a keyboard. Right, believe me, it's beeping, right? There you are. For anyone who does not know, this is the Litany Against Fear from the probably the greatest work of science fiction ever created, Dune. Not the David Lynch one. No, anyway. Although I do like that as well. So I mean that's remarkably silly, but and I'm not really going to go into lots of details about how it works. I will show you some of the code. But it's relatively straightforward, I think. I hope. Basically, again, assume there are constant lets down here. I'm not that bad a JavaScript developer these days, but you set up a context. It's an audio context. Then you create an oscillator, which is basically describing a sound. In this case, it's a triangular wave. Set a frequency. And connect the two things up, connect the oscillator to the context, and start playing it. That's it, and then tell it when to stop. So just for really simple sounds, it's like that. It's not too difficult to do, I don't think. wanting to go with this sort of stuff, and a lot of the other things I might show you, or at least some of them, not everyone is going to want their browsers to start beeping at them, and they don't really want to turn off sound for every tab individually. That's the most annoying thing in the world. So perhaps if you're going to do something like this, have it off by default and have a setting that people can turn on if they want to. But it's, you know, it's, again, it's just a little thing. We're not talking huge amounts of code. You know, I wrote more code to get the stuff to display on the screen at intervals than I did to actually set up the making a beeping noise. And I'm not a sound engineer, so you can do better than just a low frequency, you know, noise. But it just turns something kind of boring, just adds something that might make using your website a little bit more interesting, a bit more pleasurable compared to everyone else's. Okay, so more web audio type things, web speech API and speech synthesis. I think this is a bit cooler. I had this idea, and it's probably, you know, not a brilliant idea, but you could use web speech synthesis to add audio descriptions to video. And I really just wanted to see if it's feasible, not necessarily recommend it, but, you know, judge for yourself. If you don't know, audio description is the audio content that goes along with the regular audio track of a piece of video content, and it describes what's happening on the screen for anyone that can't see it. So you wouldn't describe everything, but if, let's say, you had a fight scene going on, you'd want to know who was being punched by who had someone in a headlock, that sort of thing, and it'd be very difficult to pick that up just based on what you're hearing in the audio. So audio description gives you that other part of the picture. This is the second Netflix reference of the night. I don't work for them or anything, but they're kind of useful in this context. They got into a little bit of bother when they released Daredevil, because they released a show about a blind person that wasn't accessible to blind people because it didn't have audio description when it first launched. Now, of course, that wouldn't actually bother the Daredevil. He can probably sense the pixels activated on the screen through vibrations or something, because he's the worst representation of a blind person I've ever really sort of heard of, because he can do everything without being able to see. So it doesn't really affect him at all, does it? It's only a benefit. So I don't know what's going on there, but anyway, it's a good show. Go and watch it. It's brilliant. But for everyone else, you know, it's a problem. Now, to their credit, Netflix pretty quickly went and corrected this problem, and since then they've actually done a reasonable job, I think, of providing audio descriptions for their shows. But, you know, still got a bit of that developer itch, so I thought, well, let's see what we can do here. I'm going to show the demo. Let's see. I was reminded of this. This is probably a video you've seen before. It's of a dog called Fenton running away. All right, so the audio matters here. Let's hope this works.
An amateur video recording of a walk through a park. 3 deer can be seen grazing in the middle distance. A man off screen begins to shout. As the camera pans to the right, a herd of deer runs from right to left. The camera pans to the left as it follows the herd of deer running away. A dog appears from the right. A man also appears from the right, facing Fenton the dog. As Fenton and the deer disappear into the distance.
Right. So, now, I should say that writing audio description content is an art form in and of itself, because I cheated a bit there. I paused the video at one point because I couldn't fit it in. But when you're doing like broadcast television, that's not what you get to do. You just get given content and you have to fit in whatever you need in the gaps in the dialogue. And it's, yeah, people who do that, you know, fantastic. They have to be really good at their job to make it work seamlessly. So I just cobbled this together. So now, again, you probably don't want to do this, but let's be honest, we all get given content and designs and things like that that just don't really work, and it's left to the developers writing JavaScript to hack this as best they can to make it work. So I guess very, very worst case scenario, you might do something like that. But it's a cool demonstration of the speech synthesis API, I think. That person talking was, I think it's Daniel is the name of the speech set, but there are many others, and you can actually find out what you've got installed with a single line of code. I'm not sure I actually included on the slide, but if you're interested, I can show you that later. Let's see if I can go back to my slides. But again, actually, might be, sort of simpler than you might think. So I'm getting the reference to the speech synthesis API. I create an utterance, so a new speech synthesis utterance of whatever text you want, and then I just say synth.speak, and it will read it out. So the settings that you've got for that are choosing the voice, choosing the pitch, choosing the speech rate, all that sort of stuff. But if you just did this will work on its own. All the rest of it is defaults. You don't need. And then I've just tied it to the video with an event listener on the time update, which is, I don't know, I can't remember what the hertz it runs at, but it depends on your system. But it's it's every 0.3 of a second. You're probably going to get that sort of accuracy, I think, from that. And that just updates every time, basically every time in the video player, the time stamp updates for it. And so, effectively in this event listener, I'm doing this, setting up all this stuff and speaking out. Really fairly straightforward. Again, I wrote more code to get it to figure out the video bit than I did to do the speech bit. So, have a think about if you can think of anything where that might be useful. Give it a try. Okay. Now, so we got beeping, we got reading out content, but that's not really enough to make a new best friend out of. We actually need someone to listen to us, and it's 2019, I believe, and we're still typing into our computers. And every sci-fi show, well, maybe not June actually, every sci-fi thing, promised me that I'd be talking into my computer, and without some extra software, which I do use, I'm not really doing this as part of the web browser. And there's quite a lot of scope, I think, for this, but one of the most obvious, I think, is something that you see sometimes in native mobile applications, very little on the web. But again, we have a demo. Let's hope this works. Right, this is, you may notice I'm running my things on Firefox because, open web and supporting that and all that sort of stuff. But this only works in Chrome. Not even nightly or anything like that, literally only in Chrome, but one day. So Chrome. You'll just see the difference there. I still created a page, but a bit of progressive enhancement, the button's not shown. Dead easy. Right. So a couple of things. This does require a web connection, so I'm relying on that. I'm on the Wi-Fi, so that's good. So we should be all right. It does send this to Google HQ, so make of that what you will. But people are bringing listening devices into the house. I've done it myself, and so again, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. But I might start to get inundated by whatever I type in here, but or say in there. But anyone's got a suggestion for me to search for? A question?
Is the API itself is sending to you?
Yeah, so it's the browser API. Just the browser is basically passing this on. Yeah, passing it on to Google, and then the return results. I'll show you the snippet of the API, but any suggestion for what I should say? The API is really the recognition is pretty good, so we can say whatever we want. I'm just going to search for something. Say keep it clean. Anyone?
Best you know.
Ooh. I don't need DuckDuckGo for that. Okay, all right. So let's hope this works. I've been messing around with the audio on this, and it stopped working, and then I made it work again. You'll see the button go blue, and that's when I'm going to talk. Best. Oh, yes. Also, this is deliberate. I just forgot that I'd done this. Right, because it uses using your microphone, it's going to ask for permissions and things like that. So that's a good thing. So, yeah. Right. Best June novel. It even capitalizes it. Look at that. That's brilliant. And, shall we? Let's find it. What is the best order to read the books? Well, yeah, don't read the stuff that was written by his son, and just read the rest. That's the best answer. So yeah, again, this is perhaps sort of simpler than where's my slides gone? Oh, there we go. There they are, my slides. Than you might think. It's amazing. People design these APIs have thought about usability and stuff. So I grab a WebKit speech recognition. Hopefully at some point we can drop the WebKit, but that's what's required here. We have an event listener on what that returns for the result, and then we do something with the result, which is this weirdly complex nested array or object of something. But that's what you get back. You can also do things like request multiple results. So if it's not sure what it's saying, you can say, well, return me a maximum of 5 possible options and things like that. So if you want people to set it up so you speak into it, you choose something, you can do that. And then you get an end event, which is really handy just to make sure that they've stopped listening. So again, I'm doing things like making the button blue and add some ARIA states to it, so you know it's active and not, and that's the bit where I'm do it. And then it's literally recognition.start. Call that, and yeah, you have speech recognition built into browsers. I think that's pretty neat. And there's really no good reason not to sort of include it in things like simple search forms. Question?
What's the sort of current tolerance for speech recognition at the minute with regards to different regional kind of accents and cadences and things like that?
So,
even in English, it varies massively.
Oh, it does. I like to say it's pretty good with my accent, but I'm from the northwest of England, so I tried it with a Scouse accent. Oh, it's pretty good. It wasn't too bad, actually. I mean, you can set the language that it expects to hear. It defaults to whatever the language of the page is, set with the lang attribute, which is handy. That's the sort of default. But if you want to, you can set it to different languages. I don't know what Google is supporting at their end, but I found it pretty good. Feel free to try it later, and I think your voice is going to be fine. Seems all right. But anyone with a strong regional accent wants to give it a go? You don't have strong regional accents in Bristol, do you? It's all perfectly understandable. So yeah, give it a go. But like I say, I think this is it's super simple to add to any website where you've got search in the top right-hand corner. Put that in. Let's forget with this typing nonsense and make people look stupid when they're searching for things in public. But it's an enhancement. It just makes things a little bit nicer, perhaps pleasurable. You don't have to use it. You can just type in if you want, but it's there. Okay, so that's it. Just wanted to show you a few ideas and try and inspire you to think about, well, what can I do that little bit extra to make my site go from functional and usable to pleasurable to use. And have I got time for questions? Yeah, yes. So the question is, have I tried to use it for sort of focusing on different things and navigating pages? So no, and sort of yes, in that I have used that. I have a little bit of RSI through typing for too long and not looking after my hands the way I should. So sometimes I use a piece of software called Dragon Naturally Speaking, which basically does that. So it's a full speech interface. I can command my entire desktop with it in theory, browse the web, whatever I need to do. Now the thing about that is if people need that, I'm saying need rather than would like, then they're going to use a dedicated tool like Dragon. There's also something built into Mac OS. I'm not sure about Windows 7. Yeah, it is, right. So, and you know, varying degrees of quality and accuracy. But if people need them, they're going to use their own thing. It's like, well, screen readers is another example. Sometimes you'll see little controls on pages to, you know, read out the site, and I think, you know, some people think maybe that they're doing this because, well, that'll make blind people, you know, be able to use the website. But how did they get to your website in the first place if they don't already have something to do that, right? Same with, same to some extent with, you know, the sort of controls for increasing the text size. Well, one, it's built in the browser, and two, if someone needs that, they need it on every site they visit, pretty much. So your site isn't special for someone to go, unless you ridiculously small text in the first place. So I think you could. The problem with things like that is that you need to know what people are going to say. So you know, you get returned these strings, but do people know that they should say click instead of press to activate a button? You know, so you get into those sort of problems. So I would suggest that yes, you could, but it's probably not worth the effort. But you could do conversational interfaces like, you know, really annoying banking help desk things. I don't really like those on phone calls though, because I never get where I want to. But you could have it as an option, because some people just don't like talking to human beings, and they're a benefit to them. So, yeah. Yes.
In your last code example, you had event listeners on the API there, and you mentioned about how, for instance, on the end event, you were removing the ARIA role from the element.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any mechanisms within the browsers that are more native and not part of the document in terms of subscribing to events? Because I never really used ARIA in an event-driven way before, as opposed, you know, in kind of response to something happening that's real time.
Right, I'll take a chance on this and show you my actual code. Again, don't judge me. So, oh, yeah, it's a bit hard to see, isn't it? So what I'm doing is really just this. So when you click on the button, it just sets this ARIA pressed attribute. So is there something more native to these sort of things? Well, I mean, the purpose of this is we're responding to things. So all I'm doing is using that to notify the user that something's happened. So they've clicked on the button, and, you know, it's not immediately obvious that what's going on really. So I'm setting it to, instead of black on a white background, I'm setting it to white text on a blue background, and because that's a visual thing, which would mean nothing to a blind person using a screen reader, I'm doing the equivalent, which is ARIA dash pressed, which basically says this button is currently pressed. And then on the event, you can see I'm doing really lazy try catch here. Gosh, that's exactly the wrong thing. Just the reason for that is it was a lot easier than doing something like this, recognitions, blah, 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 and then if that, you know. So anyway, I was being lazy. But, you know, I don't think there's any sort of way to really respond other than using event listens to something like this API. I mean, you know, it's not DOM, it is JavaScript. So yeah, this is the only thing you're doing. So you know, ARIA is primarily for these, well, rich internet interactive applications. So you know, it's entirely appropriate to be using ARIA in this way. It is what it's designed for. Thank you very much.